So this is the framework that I've used to help 50 SDRs get promoted to account executive. So the first step is, so I'll just go through the 7 steps and then I'll go into more detail about each of these. So the first step is being able to rewrite and figure out what's our disempowering narrative. So another way of saying that is, what is our self-limiting belief system? The second one is the elephant in the room strategy. So the third one is doubling down on your secret sauce. The fourth one is figuring out your blind spots. Fifth one is mentorship, curating community, how to integrate and how to leverage community to get a lot more opportunities. Number 6, mastering the art of interviewing. And number 7, proactively campaigning for promotions. So leveraging these 7 steps, you'll be able to get promoted from account executive to here, let me just make sure this works. Stream settings. Let me see this. Okay, so this is working. All right, just making sure that it works. So the first one is rewriting our disempowering narrative. Like, how do we go about that? What does that even mean exactly? We all have disempowering narratives. Like, we all have stories that ultimately aren't empowering us. And some of the stories that we have that is disempowering could be, for instance, I didn't go to college, or I don't look like everything else. I don't look like other account executives, right? So that could be like I'm, for in my case, I'm an Asian person. So growing up, I didn't see a lot of, like, even in corporate America, right? You see a lot of the executives look a certain way. You see enterprise account executives typically are good looking white men, right? Your Tom Brady looking type of folks in the world. But it's helpful to know what our disempowering narrative is. So some of the exercises, how you're able to do that is, what are my beliefs, and is this ultimately empowering me? Like, is this actually helping me out? Right. So with a lot of people, like me believing, so I have a client who I have a lot of clients who didn't go to college, and one of my clients, she didn't have, like, she has an associate's, but she doesn't have a bachelor's degree, right? And you might make the argument, well, a lot of jobs require a bachelor's degree. Well, it's realizing, of course, like, we as humans, we inherently will collect evidence on things that we think are true and what we think is not true. So I like to think to myself, okay, are there Asian chief revenue officers or Asian directors of sales out there? There are. It's not as common, but they certainly are. So for me, it's empowering to reach out to these people for mentorship instead of trying to internalize that myself. So whether you didn't go to college, you're maybe you're not a super good looking person, or you're a short person. In my case, I'm less than 5'4", right? So if I haven't, like, let's say my disempowering narrative is like, I'm not the best looking person in the world, right? Is this ultimately going to help me? Well, of course not. If I believe that, then I'm not going to be successful in sales. I'm going to be doubting myself. And of course, I can't just magically, like, be good looking, right? But it's okay. What are the things that I can take that will actually help me move in the right direction? So it's like working out more, going to CrossFit, doing things that ultimately help me become like a better human being. And it's not having a pity party for myself and be like, oh, well, I guess I'm short, so I'm never going to get promoted. Right. So that's the first disempowering narrative. The second one, which is ties very nicely, is called the elephant in the room strategy. So what that looks like is being able to bring out the elephant in the room. So let's say you look and you see that most account executives at this organization that you're applying for have typical tech sales experience. Like, maybe they worked at Snowflake, Databricks, Sumo Logic, etc. But of course, if that's the case, you start that interview and you say, like, hey, look, I don't come from a traditional SaaS background, software as a service for people who aren't in this world, but this is what I do have. And this is how having diversity, and this is how I've grind to get to where I am. So maybe as a waiter, and I was a general manager at a restaurant. It's like, okay, well, how can I parlay that? And instead of focusing on the negatives, which is, hey, I don't have any SaaS experience, you can leverage your expertise and you're able to bring out the elephant in the room. And because they're going to think that anyways, right? The hiring managers can be like, oh man, do I want to take a chance with someone who has never been in software as a service? Well, one of my, one of my colleagues that I helped get into an organization, I coached him around leveraging his experience as a general manager and how much time management, how much prioritization, all these skills that are very transferable to the account executive role. So that's called the elephant in the room strategy. Another way of using that is if you're making a cold call and it's like, hey, clearly they're not, maybe they thought you were someone else, maybe they thought you were the doctor, like a call that they were waiting for. So you want to be able to say, hey, I know you're not expecting my call. And then that way it kind of drops their guard. And then you go into your ask, right? And then you go, but the reason why I really want to talk to you is because, XYZ, right? You could say, I've done more sales training than any other human being possible. This is the value. Oh, you're in the waiting room. Oh, there you go. Good stuff, Charlie. I got someone joining. Yo, what's good? Oh, snap, you're actually at the airport. Nice. So
What's
just to recap, so I went through the first strategy, the framework that I'm talking about. The first one is how do I figure out what's my self-limiting beliefs? And then the second one is what's the elephant in the room strategy? So like let's say you don't have any closing experience, right? You're trying to transition from SDR to AE. If the hiring manager is interviewing like all these other reps that have all this SaaS experience as an AE, you just start off by saying, hey, Mr. Hiring Manager, like I know that obviously I don't have closing experience, right? But this is what I do have, and this is like, would you prefer to have someone? And this is where you kind of drop in some of that FUD, right? You're like, would you rather have a rep that is kind of set in his ways and yes, maybe he's been in sales for 15 years, but he's not really open to feedback. He's going to keep thinking that he knows everything. Or would you rather have someone who's green, who is curious and is able to hustle and is able to be coachable, and you can groom that person, right? So I call that the elephant in the room strategy. Any questions on that?
This is just for me, right?
Yeah, yeah, you're the only person that joined. Well, there's people watching
Oh,
from for the LinkedIn Live as well, but you're the only person on the live right now.
okay. Yeah, no, well, should we go through your framework or should we
Mhm.
talk about like what I've already kind of done and then get your coaching on that one?
Oh, okay. All right, let's go through the framework first because I have a feeling it will be in the thing of the framework, but then yeah, we could
Okay.
leave plenty of time to do that. All right. And I'll go through each of these quickly, and then I have a feeling your question will help me kind of elaborate more on some of these things. So the third one is double down on your secret sauce. So like figuring out what's your unfair advantages, like what really makes you unique, like what is Charlie really good at, what is Davidson really good at, right? What's Sean really good at? The fourth one is mentorship and curating community. So how do I leverage my relationships with informational interviews to kind of set the foundation and have the groundwork for me to get promoted? So it's leveraging your ecosystem and getting insights that way. The sixth one is mastering the art of interviewing. So like intentionally, like the same way you were reading sales books, right? Like really getting better at interviewing. And that could be through interviewing people for your podcast. Like it could just be being curious. Like you lead with curiosity. So I feel like you're really good at this. And then the last step is proactively campaigning for promotions. So it's like you have to think like 5 steps ahead, right? Like, let's say your goal is to be a SDR manager or an enterprise AE one day. Like, yeah, you're not going to get promoted tomorrow to enterprise AE, but what are the steps that I'm doing to set the foundational work and then let the hiring managers know this is my intention so that they can coach you as well, right? So these are all the things that, so that's the 7-step framework that I've used to help SDRs with their promotions. Any questions on any of
Love
that?
that. Well, I think like for the one about making sure that you address the elephant in the room, like in my specific instance, I think because I'm vying for an internal promotion from SDR to AE where there's a pretty set like
Mm,
criteria for what you're supposed to do, that's probably less relevant versus if you're like applying for as an SDR to hire for an AE position outside of
yeah.
the org that you're in. But I think like because everyone interviewing me knows I'm an SDR, but I think that it is relevant to like try and build an army of champions, so to speak, and like make sure that you are reaching out to people and making it known that you want to be an AE at the company, addressing skill gaps that you feel like you might have before you step into the
Mm,
role. Like that's a big one. Um,
yeah.
and then, yeah, I feel like along those lines, like what sort of what I've been doing. We at Gong we have like what's called a ticket to play. So you source
Mm.
a certain amount of SAOs and you get
Oh.
this the eligibility to be even able to interview. And so
Mm,
what I've been doing as I near ticket to play is just kind of reaching out to all the frontline AE managers, making sure that they know who I am, kind of asking good questions, building up my brand internally, uh, and also with the AE like director, right? Making sure I do that as well. And then like doing a bunch of mock discovery calls with top performing
mm,
AEs just to make sure I bridge the skill gap. I think with Gong too, like having the benefit of being able to listen to the full
mm,
sales cycle and choosing like a deal that you can listen from start to finish and kind of learn a little bit more about is has been a big thing. Um, but I think like ultimately one question I have is like a big part of this process is like you kind of have one shot when you interview for this. Like you're either gonna
mm,
get it or they're gonna like pass up on you. And if they pass up on you, it's like, hey, like
mm,
dude, you kind of like dropped the ball. Like you had all this time to prepare. You
mm,
were this SDR. Like you kind of have to like perform during the interview. And I guess like
mm,
it doesn't like once you get your ticket to play, you can like wait as long as you want to try and like address any skill gaps before you
mm,
interview. So my question is like, what do you feel like? Is there a certain, I guess, benchmark of like, hey, once you're at this point in your
mm,
journey as a sales professional, as an SDR, like is when you should feel comfortable to interview, or what are
mm.
your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Look, I think sounds like any big organization. I mean, any sales organization at this point, it's super competitive, obviously, right? I think you kind of have to be like over prepared. You kind of have to be like almost like overdoing it, right? Where you're meeting with the people that would be your teammates. Like at LinkedIn, for instance, like I would meet with everyone on the team that I was interviewing for. Like even though the opening hasn't opened yet, it's like I'm for those 6 to 9 months prior to me actually like what my actual timeline is. I'm meeting with like I know every single person on the team. I know that I'm meeting with my manager, like that person that would be my manager. And like to your point, I'm working on skill gaps, right? So the best people, the ones that always get promoted, they're like almost 3 years ahead. Like they're just so it's like everyone knows who's gonna get promoted before the role even opens, right? Because not only, like you said, are they working on co-collaborating, like let's say you're SMB AE and you're trying to go for the mid-market role, they're already collaborating with folks on the team on mid-market opportunities, right? Just to kind of shadow and kind of like be involved. Like maybe you're really good at setting expectation and the timeline and like the project management piece. So like you're helping the other rep with working some of their deals and you're already meeting, like let's say, you're 3 quarters from like realistically like being able to get promoted, right? You're meeting with the hiring manager at least once a month anyways, right? So even in those 9 months, you would have had 9 opportunities to address skill gaps, right? And that's when you still bring up the elephant in the room thing, right? So let's say you're like new to L&D and you're selling like an L&D product, right? Like at LinkedIn Learning, right? You can just bring out like you can be like, hey, like I know it's super competitive. I know some of the other reps that are also applying have been at LinkedIn for 3 years longer than I have, right? So you kind of bring that up, right? So it's almost like because at the end of the day, they're gonna think these anyway. So you want to anticipate their objections, and you're gonna like bring it out. So then they could be like, yeah, you're right. So then you could be like, okay, so given that, what would you suggest for me to do, right? And then they'll be like, okay, well, there's an initiative that if you can build out like training for all the SDRs, like, I think that would be like that would actually help you out a lot, right? So it's just like these things that you could do prior to that promotion. Um, and in terms of, yeah, like we said, building your brand internally, right? Like there's always going to be like whoever builds, I think a lot of AEs, a lot of people, we focus, a lot of good AEs, like, yes, of course, you're going to be outbounding, but you should spend for every amount of time you spend like outside, like more outbound, like external stuff, like closing deals, you should spend equal amount of time internally as well, right? Because like the internal will help you build relationship with the pre-sales, with solutions architects, with the SDR manager, with all these different roles that different stakeholders that might be involved in your promotion. So I think that's like the one thing that sometimes I did a bad job at because I would be so focused on results and like, yeah, I'm crushing my number and all that. But I learned the hard way, and then people got promoted over me because they were really good with the internal stuff. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, you're almost like prospecting in both. You're running the sales motion internally and externally.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And then
I
the mock discovery is great, right? Because it's like it shows where the skills gaps are, and it just shows like, oh, this guy's like coachable. And unfortunately, I don't think enough AEs. I think the higher up people go, like enterprise and strat, they don't do as much mock discoveries and stuff like that. So you can almost be like that person that advocates for that stuff because I do think sometimes we get complacent, like the older we get, like I mean, I never did any mock discoveries with the AEs at enterprise AEs at Coach Hub. And, these are folks that have been selling for like 30, 40 years.
100%. I feel like so one of the pieces of advice I got from a commercial AV manager was like once you feel you're at a point in your discovery where you can lead a call without relying on like a preset list of questions, you're probably at a pretty good spot. So I feel like that's like a back to my question around how do you know when you're ready to actually interview for a like it's one thing to get your ticket and be able to interview, but how do you know when you actually
Hmm.
should interview? I
Hmm.
think what his perspective was, yeah, like make sure you're able to like have conduct a discovery as though like you're actively listening and like not just like reading off a pre-list of
Hmm.
questions. Do you have anything to add to that in terms of like, hey, you are ready to interview for AE
Hmm.
when X?
That's a good point. I think it's what makes us the impatience is kind of what makes the best people the best, right? But it's also their kryptonite. There's been plenty of SDRs that got promoted to AE, like in my opinion, too early, and they actually have struggled. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was one of those people. Like when the first three AE roles I had, I was absolutely horrible. I was garbage, but I was so looking forward to get promoted that I almost didn't make the most out of my SDR role. So I actually went back to being an SDR because I truly wanted to master like that role, right? Like just like the drive, the resourcefulness, like just truly mastering prospecting. And I've had a lot of counterparts that have never been SDRs. And for them to like get them to actually pick up the phone and call is like you might as well ask them to like jump off the bridge, right? It's crazy how there's still a lot of AEs that are just so used to working for orgs that have like a lot of inbounds. So I think that skill is very helpful. I think intuitively you'll know when you're ready, right? I think you can listen to others but intuitively you'll be like, you know what? Like I feel like I truly have mastered this role, right? And you'll know. And there's no like science, I would say there's no formula, but deep down inside, like you'll know, you know. And but yeah, I mean, as you know, there's the internal of sometimes it's like a matter of openings, right? Like, hey, this person left to go to a different company, or this person got promoted to mid-market. So, but you'll know, right? Because you're kind of in the loop. And that's the thing that I want to stress to folks. Like, if someone gets hired and you didn't know and you're like shocked, that means you're like totally not in the loop. Like, you know, and sometimes you do have to play the game, and there is a bit of politicking that comes with it. But at the end of the day, if you're good at it, you don't even necessarily, this is a hot take. I think the folks that get promoted aren't actually the best performers because sometimes the top performers, like they're just so laser focused, like they don't actually care about like the internal stuff. Whereas the folks that get promoted to sales management, at a lot of companies I've been at, including Shrinet, were like middle to above middle of the pack performers, but they were really good at like the politics, right? Like they were so and and in some ways that makes sense, right? Because if you're like laser focused, you're almost selfish, right? You're like, I'm turning off my phone, I'm not answering the Slacks, like I'm not like on Teams all day, I'm not like onboarding new people, like I'm just freaking focused, right? And then the folks that end up becoming managers are sometimes more of those like, hey, like let me kind of take you under my wing, like let me mentor you and stuff like that. So it makes sense, but it's almost counterintuitive. It's almost like just because you're a top performer doesn't mean you'll get promoted. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So it's like, again, building the brand internally, still having those results as table stakes, making
Yeah.
sure what that when people are talking about you when you're not in the room, that it's like, yeah, we know this kid, we know he wants to be an AE, he's like a great fit. I think like also just kind of anticipating, like, asking sort of those hiring the people that you would work for on their team, like what are you seeing like your best reps are doing differently from the other ones, and like,
Mm,
you know like just kind of like share a little bit more about that, because then you can
mm,
start to like emulate those behaviors now as opposed to like when you actually get to that point. For me, I
mm.
think those are like the questions I'm asking. I feel like I know what I need to do and I do feel ready. It's just interesting that like once I get my ticket, I just need like it's gonna be there is a lot of like internal politicking, because like you said, there's people that have been there longer, there's people that have come from other closing roles before outside of Gong. So it's like kind of outside of your performance, like why me sort of thing. So I'd be curious
Yeah.
if like when it comes to answering that question, like what are the things that you want to hit on?
Yeah. So there's like three ways I would look at it. There's three components. So a third of it is like individual performance, right? What's your numbers? What's your metrics? Blah blah blah. Like are you winning spiffs? Like you said, table stakes. The other third of it is like how do I contribute to like my team, right? Like am I helping out other teammates? Am I like being generous with sharing like best practices and like am I like actually helpful? And then the other third of it is like, well, how do I impact the organization, like Gong, for instance, as a whole, right? And those are taking on different initiatives. Sometimes that's like being an ERG leader, although I would argue that sometimes that hurts you because they will be like, oh, well, I just care about how much your value you're adding to like the sales org and not necessarily. So and that's a little nuanced depending on the organization. Like sometimes being some of those like leaders outside of the sales org is helpful depending on who the stakeholders are, who the hiring managers are, and if you're still performing, right? But I think I made the mistake of over being way too involved with like the ERG and all that stuff. And I would argue that actually hurt my promotion chances because they were like, oh, it's great that you're doing all this like cool stuff. Like, yeah, like we love that you're like saving the world and blah blah blah. But the reality is like you're hired to sell, right? So like they don't necessarily care. Like I hate to be um jaded, but the reality is like all they care about is your sales, right? Your numbers. So so a third, yeah, table stakes, like you said. So I always think of the promotion as like a really, really long sales cycle, right? It's like a 9 month to 18 month sales cycle, depending what openings are in. So it's like you have to be like one of the first people, and then when you're meeting with that hiring manager, what else? What else? Like, how much are you working on the skill gaps that we've addressed, right? Like, are you actually working on it? And then reporting to them, like, hey, this is what I did. If there's no progress, or and they're gonna have stuff that comes up, so they're gonna like reschedule, right? Especially have other priorities, you know. So and sometimes they don't even know like when the next opening is, right? So some of it is literally like you always want to do all the work before you need something. But when you need something, it's like, oh, like, yeah, Shu and Charlie, obviously, like, yeah, we've had a relationship for 18 months now. Hopefully it doesn't take 18 months, but like you said, right, it's very competitive at these organizations that you and I have been at. Um, so yeah, hopefully that's helpful context.
Yeah, and I think to your point about like showing, not just talking about like, hey, I, when we first met, you said discovery was a really important skill. So I went and mock discovery practice with all these AEs. It's like, okay, but what was the actual tangible improvements that you made? I have some thoughts on like articulating that and demonstrating that, but I'd be curious, like, what are some things that you as an SDR, as you think about, like, let's take discovery, for example, showing that you like quantifiably improved in that area, how would you go about showcasing that?
Do you want to go first and then I'll add on to what you said?
I think for me, it's like just having the benefit of Gong is like I can record the conversations that I'm having with these AEs, show like the evolution over time of like, hey, here's where I started. Then look at how I brought in this like point of view to start off my discovery calls. Look at me actually do this in a customer and like conversation in a discovery call. Here's what it led to. Here's the next steps that I was able to solidify and like showing it actually being implemented as opposed to you just saying, yeah, I just like role played and
Mm.
did a bunch of mock discoveries. It's like show the results that actually led to.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. I would add another level of component to it as well, which is every team has like different missing needs, right? Similar to like conducting like a discovery call with a client. So maybe like the hiring man, let's say you're considering two different teams, right? One is like Jason's team and one is KP's team, right? And they both have like completely different skills. Maybe one team has like a lot of like Gong domain expertise and like they're super knowledgeable about the competitive landscape. Maybe they really understand like Zoom info, sales nav, and like sales enablement slash marketing software, right? So maybe like the value that you add to them, and then you only know this from talking to, other reps or just talking to the manager. So like let's say they had like one of their top reps leave and there's an opening, but like that rep was like really good at like XYZ. Well, now that's a gap that they're missing, right? So it's like, oh, how do I come in and be able to complement and be able to add value? So really it really does matter, like it really does depend on each team's needs. Like some might be like really good sales acumen and like, or maybe they're all like sharks, but they have no team culture or no value. And then the manager's like, hey, I wish we would actually be closer. Like, is there anything that you can add on that front, right? Because some managers do care about that. And it's also identifying like what that hiring manager cares about as well, right? Because you might think like, oh yeah, of course they want like sharks that are go-getters that are like crushing the numbers. And yeah, like most managers do. But some managers like don't care about that as much and maybe they're actually trying to build like, hey, like I want people that are like really like coachable and like people that this is what I'm looking for. So it's making sure we don't have any assumptions, but you only know that from doing like that discovery when you're meeting the hiring managers and you're talking to the teammates of your potential the team that you're going to join eventually.
Yeah, that's a really good call out because I think everyone that I'm going to be up against all have, you know, blown their numbers out of the water. So it's
Yeah.
they know that no matter who they go with, people have proven that they can hit quota. The question is like, hey, based on the skill sets that you've noticed on your team, where do you feel like the gaps are? Whether that is with building team camaraderie or culture, whether that's like someone was really good at like pressure testing champions, but they
Mm,
left. Like what specifically within the sales cycle do you feel like your reps might have a gap with that, like if
mm,
you could hire someone to fill that, that's like the perfect person you
mm,
want, and then figure out how to develop those skills kind of thing. So like basically treating your, again, another example of treating your the person that would be hiring you to their team like a prospect, running discovery on like what's
yeah,
the most important skills you're looking for in your reps,
exactly.
not just amongst the reps you already have those skills. Like what skills do you feel are missing on your team that you would
Yeah.
want to fill?
It, and it's also not to because I do think what you said is important as well, right? Like working on like this very specific things that you've been working on with that hiring manager, right? And not everyone, maybe sometimes hiring managers are like, hey, like I don't have the bandwidth to like do this. So like reach out to me a little bit later on in your career. But like any good salesperson, you got to just be like professionally persistent, right? Like any other prospect, like you almost have to like build relationships with everyone else that they're close to, and then they're just like, dude, you have to talk to Charlie, like you have to, like he's the man, like, and then eventually you'll be like, dude, like, all right, like you're like there's like five people that telling me that I need to talk to you, like what's good, so it's almost like you have to do that at these like more competitive companies, like the ones that you and I are used to.
Yeah, I love that. Um, I feel like that's like a really good overview of things that we need to be doing. Um, I guess like from like a so you mentioned perform like the results and then the leadership and learning piece.
Yeah.
So when I feel like we hammered on the results piece. I feel like as far as the leadership, like and even just building your brand out internally, that kind of covers that bucket.
Yeah.
So in terms of the learning, and I know we kind of touched on it with like seeking out, role plays and different things with, grade A's. What other things, I guess, just knowing you've been an SDR and an AE, what are some of
Mhm.
the things that you wish you would have known going into the AE role from SDR that you're
Mm.
like, damn, if I could redo this process all over again, I would have like
Ooh,
drilled these skills really well.
that's a really good question. I think it almost looks so easy from the other end, right? Like you're like, oh, I could do that. I mean, I think I'll speak for all SDRs and say that we all like have seen it and we're like, I could ask better questions. Like it's funny, right? Like that's totally how I thought. And it's crazy because I was literally shadowing, I was very fortunate where all of my AEs were like crushing it, making like FU money, like half a mil to 600, 700. So like, and as an AE, like I've also had folks on my team that are making like 800K, right? So I'm very fortunate to have that. And you know, so I want to preface by saying the things I wish I could have spent more time on. Um, I think I was like so focused on reading like sales books. I'm like, oh, I gotta read like Challenger Sale and Spin Selling and like MedPick and all this stuff. Like it's like, dude, you don't need any of that stuff. In my opinion, and this is another hot take, it would be a better use of time if you understand how to like really read a 10K, or if you like knew your way around the financials, or you picked up the Wall Street Journal, right? Like or read like a business book, like Ted Turner's biography or Elon Musk's biography or Bill Gates' biography, Paul Allen. That's way better use of time because they'll actually break down like their business versus like you read all these sales books and like it's all these tactics and sometimes it gets you excited for like a week or two, right? But it's not really, it just helps you with motivation, but it doesn't actually help you give substance, like actually have substance, right? Because buyers are smart. Like they know if you're trying to manipulate them and you're trying to put them through a process and like, dude, no one's falling for the, oh, is 3:30 or 4 p.m. on Tuesday better for you? It's like, yeah, like that will work, that they'll make you, 1% better, right? But what if you actually add value? What if you actually really understood their industry more than they understood their industry? Like there's only maybe 5% of reps that are actually understand like the industry. I think every SDR, every junior AE is so focused on like, well, I got to read more like these sales books and like follow these sales influencers and sales humor. It's like, dude, nothing in sales humor like will actually help you out as much as like you actually like getting some business acumen. And, you know, I think, I mean, I think another thing, which I mean, I've been guilty of this as well, is I think we or over leverage technology too much now, and like a lot of us are like literally just afraid to like pick up the phone and just call like let's and whether it's like your own CRO or whatever, like a lot of people are like afraid to talk to executives like internally, which is weird. It's like, during my first 90 days, like I'm talking to all the CR, like I'm talking to the CRO, like the C-suite, like I'm not afraid to put myself out there, right? And then people would be like, well, why would you do that? It's like well, these people have a lot of influence in your future trajectory. So why would you not invest time in that, you know? So those are the things that I would say. And I would say like setting boundaries is also like really important, especially if you're someone who like really likes to help people. Um, and then I would say be careful who you spend time with as well, because there's certain reps that let's just say like your energy gets drained when you're with them. I'm not going to mention any names, but there's certain reps at, who, and if you don't, if you can't think of someone, like you might be that person. So there's a lot of reps who like people stay the freak away from, and let's just say they just lacked like self-awareness. And then they always wonder like they've been in the same role for 5 years and they're like, oh, why did like I never get promoted? And then they get pissed off and it's like, well, yeah, because like you're just not pleasant to be around, you know? And it's like unfortunate. Like if you've been at the same company for 5 years, I'm sorry, like you're probably that person, you know, or you
Yeah,
haven't been promoted, yeah, or whatever.
I really like that. Like, and this is something that I hear with like every single person I've talked to is just the business acumen piece. And I think this goes back to like, it's one thing to just ask questions that you hear from like, Gap Selling or Challenger or what I meant. And it's
Yeah.
another thing to like actually understand your prospects business and their world and understand like how they make money and the initiatives they
Mhm.
have, because then when you're like asking questions, you're asking it from a place of like you actually understand their business and you're asking way more relevant questions than just like, hey, what's your biggest priority right now? Right, it's like it just they
Yeah.
can tell if it's like cookie cutter or if you're actually doing extra work. I think like I like how you mentioned like a one way to do that is through reading 10Ks, and you also mentioned like over leveraging technology sometimes. So like one thing that I have a tough time reconciling is like I'll like people will say like, hey, like just throw in a 10K into Chat GPT, let it summarize it,
Mhm.
like synthesize all the points that are relevant to what you're
Mhm.
selling. Let's just take that one piece of like a 10K or like reading like an earnings call on Seeking Alpha. Like
Mhm.
how would, let's say you're coaching your former SDR self on like how to develop business acumen through reading a 10K or earnings call, like what would be the things that you would drill younger Davidson on with that?
Yeah, I think the risk factors are important, right? Like understanding like what are the inherent risks. Like I think it's smart to throw a 10K into ChatGPT, like because that helps synthesize everything. But I think if that's all you've done and you've never actually sat down and read like a 100 page like 10K, like I think it is helpful. Like maybe the first 10K, like first 10Ks, you just read and just like really get the lay of the land, right? Because it has so much information that it's like more valuable than getting an MBA in my opinion. Like I did the whole MBA thing and I thought it was useful, but nothing is as useful as actually having sales meetings with executives at Fortune 100 companies, right? Like that's like the real life MBA. Um, so I think um, like having a point of view, you mentioned point of view earlier, like I think that's what will set you apart from everyone else. Like, and that's, like I'm still learning, right? Like now I'm working with a lot more professional services with lawyers and accounting firms, and like I'm learning so much. And a lot of the folks that have been in management consulting for like 30, 40 years, they're like, hey, like truly understand like with lawyers, like understand what percentage of their book of business is what, and dig deeper to what their clients care about and what their pain points are, right? So it's like it makes a lot of sense. Like that's like almost like, oh duh, like that makes a lot of sense. But it's like once you like really internalize that, like you're less like focused on like, oh, I gotta do this like gap selling, spin selling, med pick thing. And then like you're actually just like genuinely curious, and then you're able to have like a stronger point of view to be able to like hook them. Like what is the value that you're providing, right? And then that point of view is that value because you're essentially synthesizing, you're like, hey, Mr. Managing Partner at a 30 or 50 person law firm. It's like, I've had 50 plus conversations with similar sized law firms in Manhattan, and these are the insights that I see. Like, are you struggling with this? Like maybe you're talking, it's like, this is what I'm hearing, which is when I'm talking to managing partners at accounting firms, it's people don't want to go into the office anymore. There's less culture because everyone just works from home. So, you're like struggling to literally get people to turn on their camera, right? So there's like low morale. Like, is this something that you're struggling with, right? And then you can say, there's also accounting is just not as sexy anymore, right? Are you seeing that a lot of folks are like literally pivoting completely industries and going into tech or going into engineering or just things, and folks that have been in accounting for 20 years, like, is that something you're struggling with, right? So it's like they'll know, they'll be like, oh my God, it's like this guy's like speaking directly to my heart. Like, yeah, like how does he know all this, right? But I think too many of us is like, let me put you through my process and like drill you and interrogate the shit out of you. It's like that doesn't work anymore, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. So it sounds like what you're saying is like with at least for the 10K, it's like understand the risk factors, start reading, like if instead of just reading all these sales books, like go through 10K, like read it, understand, how they make money. And speaking of the point of view, he's like, do you have sort of like a um, I guess like preparation for a discovery call, like checklist of like, hey, going into a discovery call, here are like the things you should know when you're prepping.
Mhm.
Because I think that that's like really important when it comes to bringing that POV.
Yeah, I mean, I think the level of prep depends on like the quality of, or the what you think the quality of that opportunity is, right? Like I wouldn't over prep unless like you think there's like a legitimate opportunity there, because that, we all have like over prepped for meetings that like didn't go anywhere. So there, I would say with anything there's like give and take. Like if you see, like, let's say you had your first discovery call with the chief human, like CHRO, like director of L&D, and like, like the head of employee experience, right? Let's just say you did half an hour to prep for that call, and this is like brand new, right? Maybe this is like an opportunity that like an inbound that came through, right? So I would only spend like half an hour preparing for that because like they haven't given me anything yet, right? And then let's say the call to action is like, hey, they're gonna loop in like their L&D manager and L&D director that manages like this specific coaching initiative, right? It's like until that person makes that connection, until that person like accepts that meeting, I wouldn't spend like an extra like hour. So I always think about give and take. If you see that there's like give on their end, that's how I'll definitely, because I think I've made the mistake of like over prepare, and sometimes it's good to like prepare, but we can also overdo it where we prepare and then they're not even showing up to the meeting, and you're just like, dude, I spent 5 hours prepping for this, like this sucks. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, but for the opportunities that you do deem worthwhile to prep for, like what would that
Yeah.
look like?
I think if it's like five main points, I would say like understand how they make money, right? That will be in the 10Ks. If it's smaller, like just understand. I would look at like their client like testimonials, like their case studies, right? Because that will kind of share a little bit more about like this specificity. And then I always look at like their channel partners slash their competitors. Like what is like the industry? Like do you understand the, and so that's why it's easier once you understand the industry. I would say it's like a lot easier because then you don't, but initially when you, let's say, like you used to sell to tech companies, but now like you're a rep that only sells to like professional services firms, like only like, consulting firms, for instance, right? It's like understand the consulting industry. So it's a little bit more work on the front end, but I just see like 90% of reps, that the people that I coach, like they're just so, because I think it's easier for them to like just read a sales book, and I think do like, maybe if I was to like quantify, I said maybe do 20% of your reading is like on sales book and then 80% on like whatever that industry is. So because I'm new to management consulting with my IT consulting business, I met with a guy who's been in that world. He was a partner at one of the big consulting firms for like 16 years. And he gave me like, these are all like the thought leaders, and these are the newsletters you should subscribe to. This is the book that really is like my crash, like how I really understood the management consulting industry, right? So it's like that's a great use of time, right? Like that's instead of me, because like I already have read all the sales books, so it doesn't like yeah, like sales will change a little bit, but it's not going to change that much, you know. So yeah, so how they make money, client case studies, competitors. So yeah, so the financials, and then depending on the product that you're selling, it's going to be so if you're like a tech company, then look at like what's their technology, right? What's how does AI, how's that going to impact? And then the last thing I would say is like the regulations and the compliance piece, because like that plays like a really big piece in a lot of industries, right? So as you know, there's massive multi-billion dollar opportunities sometimes when there's like new rules and regulations that are being passed because like people don't want to be shut down and they don't want to be fined like millions of dollars.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think to your point, like when there's like that, I feel like when you read, like, let's say you're verticalized and you're only dealing with professional services, that's like there's pros and cons too, because it's like you can become an industry expert because
Mm,
everyone in your book of business is in that industry and you just
yeah.
learn super like in depth on what that is. But then like if you're selling to all different kinds of industries, it's like just at least the five. I like what you just said around the five things. Know how they make money, who are the competitors, regulatory compliance, like those types of things are the things that are gonna really set you up for bringing that perspective and making sure that like you're not just one of the main masses and asking them sort of the same types of questions. It's like you're prefacing every question you have with, hey, typically when I speak with other leaders like you in this exact industry, like here's what they're saying. Like, is that the right way we talk about it?
Yeah, and then obviously like if they're like let's say you're selling to like the L and let's say L&D learning development managers or like who you're selling to or depending what the product is, also understand like who like their boss's boss is, like who's like the highest and like what is their vision and usually those people are like a little bit more public, so you'll be able to find something. But I think that's also helpful as well, right? Because then you can always leverage that to and then like don't be afraid to call them, right? I don't know why people are, I think the higher up you go, the more likely they will answer actually, because like I don't know, maybe people are just afraid of calling them. But I've called like plenty of C-suite and got them on the phone and then I'm like, oh, you must get like a ton of phone calls. They're like, actually, like not really. And I'm like, what? Like how? How's that possible? They're like, yeah, no one calls. I feel like I get a lot of emails, but people don't straight up cold call my mobile anymore. And I'm like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, I usually when I call their mobiles, it's a similar experience, or it's either like a very pleasant experience, or they're like, "Why the fuck are you calling me?" But
Yeah, exactly.
no, it's good. Um, yeah, I feel like we kind of covered like the main bases. Is there anything else you feel like based on what you went into this conversation wanting to share with people looking to promote to AE versus like the questions we covered that you feel we didn't talk about?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to have accountability, right? Like you and I, we both worked at Coach Hub, so we understand like the value of having like a coach week to week. Because think about it, if you're hiring someone and you're having like I think in some ways like your manager is going to be really focused on like the metrics and more of like the output and more of like those things, right? But they're not really going to understand like holistically like what you're going through as like a human being, because sometimes people do separate, like it's like, hey, like I'm going to keep business, right? If you're lucky enough that you do have a manager who actually cares about you and like will objectively do what's best for you, that I would say that's more rare. um it's helpful to have a coach because like mentally and then also the coach is able to help you like big picture, like 30,000 foot view, kind of like design what you want. And even your mentor at your organization is incentivized to help you stay within the organization, right? So like that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I think it's helpful to have both, right? Have people advocating for you, have mentors at competitors of, so then you kind of know like what the market is like and lay of the land, and you're able to build relationships that way. And then internally at Gong or Coach Hub or TriNet or whatever company you work for, they're going to be good because they're a few steps ahead of you, right? So they're going to like bring you on to the meetings and like advocate for you to get promoted internally, right? But the coach is even different than both the outside, someone who's in the industry, because sometimes the coach doesn't even, and I would argue it's better to get someone who's not in your industry as well, because the person that's in your industry is gonna be will have domain expertise. And sometimes the curse of knowledge is like sometimes knowledge is not good because then there might be like a completely different product or industry that actually might be booming, or it might be like a better use of your time, but you just don't know because you're just like in your bubble, you know? So I would say like that's something that I would consider as well.
Yeah, kind of sounds like you're saying like just diversify both the mentorship, coaching, and just like knowledge consumption in general. Like, don't just only do mentors internally. Don't just only, focus on sales methodologies and books. It's like literally you should be doing all of it. Like mentorships within the company, coaches, in addition to those mentorships with other people in the similar space, like consuming not just sales methodologies, but 10Ks, earning calls, podcasts, like just diversify the types of skills and information and learnings that you're getting so that you can become as well-rounded as possible. Plus, with the coach, they're going to hold you accountable to
Yeah. Like for instance, I go to this, I'm a part of Ian Koniak's community and Scott Ingram Sales Success Summit, right? Where he interviews like the top 1% folks, mostly in SaaS. And I've worked at a world-class organization at LinkedIn. Like, why would I pay out of my own pocket? Like, LinkedIn's not even paying me to go there, right? Of course, if your company's paying for you to go there, like, yeah, of course, like that's a no-brainer. You should go. But like just being able to be exposed to so many other like industries like has helped me because there's certain things like maybe like a pharmaceutical rep person does that like we in SaaS like we're not as good at, right? So I'm always curious to try to find things that work for other industries that I can parlay into, because I think like people that are in tech sales are really good at like presentation and like death by PowerPoint. Like we're very technical, like we're good at certain things. We're good at like discovery and probing and all this stuff. But there's definitely value. There's like creative ways that have worked for other industries that has helped. And I think you never know, right? Like you could be like working for like a really good organization and like you could just be like part of layoffs and it had nothing to do with you. It's just like, hey, the company's not doing, I mean, we've both been at Coach Hub, right? Like Coach Hub was like a perfect example of that. It's like it could be like amazing and like everything's good. Everyone's trying to sell you the dream. And then like 2.5 years later, the company's barely in existence, right? It's like, so I think that's another thing. I think a lot of people network too late, where like they network once they get laid off. It's like, yeah, if that's the case, like so if you are watching this and you're rewatching the live stream, whatever, like always network when you don't need something. Because when you're like desperate and you're like in survival mode and you're like, oh my God, I need to pay the bills. I have like a mortgage. I have like a wife that's gonna leave me or whatever. Like that's like not the best place to, because you're going to be super needy and the energy, people can feel that energy. And I think that's like what 90% of people do. I mean, Charlie, I think you're different. Like you're probably like, I'm asserting that you're probably one of the very few people who are networking and doing that intentionally. But I've helped so many people and it's like, it's almost like, dude, like, why are you reaching out to me? Like now that you've been out of the market for 9 months, like you should have spoken to me like way long ago, right? So I do think a lot of people they try to do everything on their own. And then I would say there's power to vulnerability. I know that you've been posting a lot more on, your journey and like documenting your journey. Um, it's the archaeologist is the what Ali Abdal like talks about that strategy. And he's like, if you're a journalist, like you're adding value because you're like, hey, I'm meeting with all these influencers, and you're just like, this is what I learned from meeting like Ian Koniak or meeting Brandon Fluharty, whatever it is, right? That's super valuable. And I think a lot of people they do it a little bit too late. Like they start reaching out to everyone much, much later, and then they realize, oh my God, like it's yeah, you're just not in a good headspace. So that's something that I wish more people would do. Like but I get it. Like sometimes people have kids and like, like sometimes that's more of a priority, but don't complain if you're not getting any opportunities, and then you blame like ageism and stuff like that, which I do think in tech sales there's some of that as well, but if you were proactive and you reached out, like you would just have more opportunities. It's like, what can I control? It's like I can't really control that this person might judge me because I'm like 60 years old, but what I can control is like having people at a lot of different organizations that I could reach out to.
How do you think about systemizing your networking strategies, right? Because like it's to do everything we're talking about, consistently deliver high performing results, networking internally, building the business acumen. It's just like so much thing. And plus you want to like live your life too.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you, I guess, design your calendar and your life in a way that allows you to keep on top of all these things?
I think like just being really honest with yourself, right? Like some people say like, oh, I care about my career, but it's like, dude, let's be real. Like you care more about family or you care more about your hobbies. And I think just being honest with ourselves, because like I'll be honest, like there was a lot of times where I was like, oh no, I do care about being like a kick-ass like AE. But like I was being and the hiring managers, they're not stupid. Like they're good at reading people. There's a reason why they're put in leadership, right? So I think just being honest with ourselves and just being like, yo, like, is this the season for my career? Is this a season? I think we all go through seasons. Like this year is a season where it's like all about the marriage, like all about like, you know what I mean? Like that's, and then the other like 40% of my energy. So 40% towards like the family and all that stuff. And then like 40% is like, this is a career, this from now to like the end of the year is like all about the business, like growing that as much as possible. And I'm honest with myself, right? So I think we all need to have that conversation internally and be like, all right, like, do I actually care about my career? And it's okay if you don't. Like, if your goal is to like, hey, I'm just gonna travel and chill and like read books and like, read some sales books and just chill and take it easy. Like, it's okay to do that, I don't think everyone is like go, go, go like us all the time, but just be honest with yourself, and then once you're honest with yourself, then maybe like a year later, you're like, okay, now it's time. Like I kind of did all of like the sightseeing thingy, and like now I'm in that season of like getting after it. And then that's when, I would say you could implement more of these things that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's really, really important. So, and I know like you're someone who's been in a ton of different companies, right? You made lasting impressions with people from these different companies. How do you have like a, I guess, system in which you think about like, hey, I'm gonna reach out to like all my Coach Hub homies
Mm,
this week and like reach out to one person here this week, reach
yeah.
out to one person here next week, or is it just like,
Hmm.
do you kind of think about it more like, oh, I haven't spoken to this person in a while, let me see how they're doing?
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think there's certain people like that don't feel like work, like when you talk to them. Like I love talking to you. Like I could talk to you like every week, right? Like because there's like a lot of value that we're both getting from interacting with each other. I would say like notice who gives you energy and like notice who you have like really good conversations with, and then be super I guess my friend Zach calls it ruthless prioritization. It's like be super ruthless with everyone else. Like people who like remotely drain you even a little bit, screw it, man. Like, and maybe you met with them for like 15 minutes and you booked for half an hour. Like, dude, you could just be like, hey, I have like a bunch of stuff like and just, and you'll probably never talk to them again. Like there out of like maybe 1,000 coffee chats, there's probably only like 100 people that I really want to keep in touch with, right? Whether it's like they're doing something that I could see myself. There's just a lot of just being smart about that. Yeah, and then just protecting your time. But I don't necessarily say I have a system. It's more intuitively, it's like, okay, like today, if I want to reach out to Adam, like I'm gonna call Adam because like I miss him. So I think I wouldn't overthink it, but I guess if I was to like systematize it, I would say make a list of like your A people, your B people, and your C people. So C people could be like executives, like movers and shakers who are like, hey, I should probably stay like kind of on their radar, right? And those people, maybe I'll invite them to like once a quarter, like happy hour that I'm hosting or something like that. And then there's like your B people who are like, I would say folks in your industry or folks who like industries you're thinking about getting into. So just interesting people that it's like, okay, like I want to stay close to them. Maybe they work for a competitor, or maybe they're like influential people that like know like a lot of people. That's like my second bucket. And then there's like your A people that like, like no matter what, like you always reach out to, and even if it feels like a lot of work, like that like these people, like you both gain a lot of value from each other. So that's how I would look at it. And sometimes those people might not be like, I mean, you're not like a CRO at like a big company, right? But I still want to keep in touch with you because like, you know what I mean? Like I do think it's a very mutually beneficial relationship. So I think, and sometimes it's nice just to help people as well, right? So I think there's something to be said about like just if I was to quantify 15% of your time like ideally could be spent mentoring and helping. So I volunteer, I do a lot of that. So that gives me like so much value in my life, even though on paper, like it doesn't make sense. Like I should be focused on other things. 15% of your time ideally could be with mentors, like folks that are like a few steps ahead or even like 4 or 5 steps ahead of you. And that will help you just be able to just dream bigger. And then like 15%, so that's 30%. And then 15% of your time, if I was to quantify it, could be spent like reaching out to competitors or folks that are like kind of in your world. And that's just helpful because you never know with layoffs, right? It's just like just to be strategic. So that's 45%. And then the other like 55%, like, and this works for me and this might not work for you, is like just pure curiosity where it's like folks in like completely different industries that I know nothing about, different roles like product management, engineering, like I don't know anything about, but like I just love meeting with them because like, well, I'm just curious. Like it just feels like my bucket, and it just like gives me like joy to be with them and just to learn something new. But like a lot of people would say like that's too much, but for me like that's helped me out a lot. And some of these folks, it's good because like maybe one day you will do cross-functional projects with them, and then like you're adding value because they're like, yo, how does Charlie know everyone? It's like, but it's because you've had coffee chats with them, so you might not need them, but maybe you'll need them later for like another project or another initiative that you might need to help out a client or potential client.
Yeah, I love that. And I know we're kind of running up on time, but I
Yeah.
totally love talking to you about all this stuff too, and feel very much similarly to you about every time we talk, it's like feels like great value is shared. So one of those things I'm like thinking about just like all the A, B, and C people you could be talking to. Do you approach like when it comes to setting up those coffee chats, do you kind of approach that from the lens of like almost like reaching out to like a friend who you haven't spoken
Mm,
to in a while? Or is it like, let's say they're
mm,
someone who you've crossed paths with at LinkedIn, but you weren't like
mm,
super close with? Are you trying to
mm,
like, how do you think about setting up time with those people? Because they're
mm.
probably like less likely to just take time out of their day just because you want to talk to them. But do you
Yeah.
try and like almost prospect them and like figure
Yeah.
out, hey, I saw that you were doing this. I thought I could add value. Like, how do you think about that?
This is a tricky one. To your point, like it's almost like a full-time job. If everyone implemented everything that we just said, like this is like, I have seasons where like some seasons I'm like more about the 10K and the business acumen and more of like the, all right, let me kind of up level and upskill. So this just preface that like, hey, like if you're not doing all this, like it's cool. Like no one's perfect. Um, so that being said, like I value my network a lot, and I think that's my superpower, right? Just having like a massive network, and I see that that's like my and in my coaching program, like I developed this to help figure out what's your uniqueness, like what's your like unfair advantage. So for me, like I know that if that's something I'm good at, like I'm definitely gonna double down on that. So I'll literally just straight call like cold call people who I haven't spoken in a while, and then they're just like, "Oh my God, Davidson, like I'm so glad you called. Like honestly, I'm such a bad friend. Like I feel so bad. Like I never reach out, but like I'm so glad you reached out to me." And they're like, "Hey, how can I help you?" And then strategically I'm also I know these people are like busy people and like movers and shakers, or like maybe I want to be a guest on their podcast, or so like, but honestly half the time like I'm just doing it out of like just pure curiosity. It's like, hey, like it sounds like you're really good at that. It's like, hey, like you it seems like you're doing pretty well. Like, hey, if you don't mind sharing, like how much are you making from being like a sales influencer? And then they'll be like, oh, I made like 1.25 million, like blah blah blah. But my first year I only made like 285,000. And it's like, dude, like that's super valuable insights that I would have never got. And I just straight up cold called them, you know? And then it's like there's an element of give and take as well, right? Because it's like if you're calling like certain people and they never pick up, like F those people, like don't try. And I think subconsciously, like some people, me including, like we almost want them to call us back, right? But it's like if I can go back in time, I would probably like spend less energy with those people. But it's like weird. Like I don't know if it's just like psychologically, like there's probably some trauma there, is all I'm saying. But I call people who are like interesting, who like I really want to stay close to. And yeah, some of those people like they'll send me a calendar, like it might be 3 months later until we connect because they're just so freaking busy or they're just focused writing their book or whatever. But I when I do finally get on their calendar, I'm like, dude, this is like totally worth the effort because like this person just accelerated my learning by like a lot, you know, and it's cool because like when you're kind of in this sales influencer world, I'm meeting like all these influencers that have like 50, 60, 70, 80,000 like followers. And I'm like, and in every conversation I have with them, like, dude, like no wonder you're killing it. Like you're just freaking, you're like a genius, right? And that wouldn't have happened if I didn't like kind of take the plunge and do this at my age, right? Some of these influencers are much older. Some of them are it took them 10 years to kind of get to like where they're like kind of like these famous LinkedIn folks. But dude, I'm so glad I met these folks, you know, and so glad that I took the initiative to call them or reach out to them.
Yeah, I like that idea of just like literally give them a call and ask, like, come from a human perspective of like, hey, it seems like you've been up to this. Like, I'd love to learn more about it. It looked really interesting. Like, tell me how's everything going? Like,
Yeah,
you know, like,
and then just share your intention, right? It's like, hey, the reason why I love talking to like LinkedIn top voice influencers is like that's my goal. Like I only have 18,500 followers now, but my goal is to get 55,000 like you know, can you kind of share like how you were able to like do that, right? So it's like always have a reason why as well, because you know, like the busier people are, like the more likely they won't answer if you don't have like a solid reason of reaching out.
and they might think if you like don't lead with what that reason is, that you're trying to like hide something instead of just like being upfront about like, hey, this is actually why I'm like reaching out to you specifically. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I get it. Not like, did you really want to just catch up and banter just to banter? Like, was there something that you like?
Yeah, and the higher up you go, like I'm sure you're realizing, right? I was super naive, so like this is like now looking back at it, I'm like, oh yeah, like this almost cringe, right? And this is why I'm excited about doing more things like this because I want to so people don't make the same mistakes I did. But I would reach out to like the GAM. So at LinkedIn, there's something called like the global account managers, and they're like the biggest, you know, those are the reps that like have like $12 million quotas and stuff like that, right? So I remember I put time on the manager's team because I'm like, oh, this is like super late, like 10 years later, dream like to do what she's doing, right? And I remember like I didn't really set like a strong agenda. It was like kind of like an open, like I didn't really prepare enough. I didn't have like a strong, like I was just meeting for the sake of meeting. And she's like, dude, like I'm sure you're a nice dude, but she's like, dude, like my time's fucking valuable, man. Like, what do you want? How can I help you? And like it that like really like rocked my world. I'm like, oh my God. And I felt like such an asshole. But it's true. Like it's like she's helping her reps close, you know, their $150 million quota. Like yeah, like I'm sure like I would have good conversation with her, but you know, but then so I was like kind of like on my feet and I was just like, hey, like this, and this. But it's like she knew I was like underprepared, right? Like if I came with like very thoughtful questions and I'm like, hey, this is like what I think I want to work on. Like, can you poke holes in it? Like it would have been like a much better use of time. But I'm still, you know, but it's like I had to make that mistake to know to never do that again with influential, you know, with people who are like that busy, of that caliber, you know.
I had a similar experience when I first joined Gong. Like, one of the reasons why Gong stood out to me is like on LinkedIn, there's so many influencers, right? And like I hit up one of like the top reps at Gong, just like I like just completely like huddled him via Slack with like just like wanting to like chat because you know a coach of it was like so casual, you could just sort
Yeah.
of like get away with a lot more of that
Yeah.
stuff. And he's like, dude, like send me and for the future, like send me like an agenda via Slack and like let's set up some
Oh, you
time.
huddled.
But
I
I'm not,
see.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like I just like pinged him. But yeah, it is you kind of have to like learn like it's the best way to learn is through kind of getting burned through because now it's like
Yeah.
every time I do seek out that it's like all right, there's a specific agenda that we're getting out
Well,
of it.
I think most people are like the opposite of what both of us just described, where we're like people are like too scared to reach out to folks, right? Like at TriNet, there was a rep named Cassandra who was making like 600 and like 90,000. Like she was like clearly always on the top of the leaderboard, right? And I would reach out to I would like straight up just cold call her because like we knew each other from like networking like a while back. And then I was just like, oh, like you probably get a lot of calls. And she's like, actually, Davidson, like you're probably the first rep to call me in like 3 months and to help to ask about deal strat. And I was like, what? I mean, given she was like, I would say more of like intimidating to folks, and she kind of has this presence, right? So it's kind of like, hey, don't waste my time type of vibe. But that was funny, and I was just like, dude, like that's crazy. But yeah, it is funny how you learn from your mistakes and but kudos to you for doing that because most people aren't doing that. And I think more people should be doing things like that and just like straight up just pick up the phone and call.
Yeah, it's not that hard to just stand out in a time where like everyone's sort of just doing the same. Like literally just think about like what are most people not doing and then go do that thing.
Hmm.
Like if you think like should I be doing this thing? Should I reach out? Like the answer is usually yes. Like you just go do, you know. Uh
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like to your point, like sometimes people might be like, well, how do I even have time to do my job? It's like, yeah, like if that drains you, like if you're more of an introvert, because the counter, like one of the biggest objections I hear from folks that are not as outgoing as us is like just like do it just one a week, right? If like you don't have to do five a week like I did, but like if one a week, if one two a week is too much, then just do like, once every other week and see how you feel, right? Just reflect on it. Just the keys to journal, to be introspective and be like, okay. And then at the end of the quarter, it's like, okay, so I did 6 coffee chats with potential roles that I might want to transition to. Like, was it good ROI? Most of the time people would say like, yeah, it was worth that. It was worth it.
even if it's just like you network with them and they like to your point earlier about how do we get promoted to eights, like if you're meeting with all the AEs that you could potentially be working alongside on their team, it's like when that they're going
Mm,
to be telling their manager who they want to be working with on their team.
mm,
They're going to say, here's the good reps. And like, if you're
mm,
one of the few that are reaching out to all the A's that you would be
mm,
working with versus like all the other SDRs, maybe they only reached out to like 3 people, but
mm,
you're the one that like reached out to every single person. It's like literally every single person is saying, yeah, Charlie or yeah,
mm.
Davidson like reached out to me and it was a great conversation. It's just so powerful.
Yeah, good stuff, man. Well, yeah, no, I appreciate this. This has been a good conversation. So, yeah, I'll be doing more of these. It sounds like Charlie's like open to, because I think it is helpful to have like more concrete questions, so that way it's a little bit more interactive. So you've inspired me to do a lot more of these. So appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, this is great. I think I love the fact that you're even doing this. And then it's like beneficial to me, obviously, to be able to ask you all these questions. But I feel like if I am an SDR wanting to be an AE and knowing other people that are like that, like these are the
Mm.
questions that they're probably having too. So it's a lot
Yeah,
more relevant, I think, when we have like that back and forth versus like these are the universal top 5 things you need to do. You know?
right. I, and I think another takeaway from this is I liked how you talked about like addressing the skill gaps. That brings me to like do a whole nother session of this where I just talk about those skill gaps, right? Because like you said, because I can come at it from the lens of like, oh, okay, this is what I wish I would have worked on as and what I didn't think was a skill gap, but in actuality, like it's a huge skill gap, right? Like, and then prioritize that as well. So that gives me ideas of what to do for the next LinkedIn Live as well.
Love that. Love that. I think, yeah, anytime you want to have another LinkedIn live and have me sort of be the question
Yo,
SDR like asking you this. I'm
let's
always
do
here
it.
for
Let's do it. What about next week? Next Monday.
it. Look
Next
at this.
Monday.
He's already teaching me how to go for the close. I love it. Yeah,
Next
let's
month.
look. What do
Next
we
Monday.
got?
All right.
Let's run it. You want to do the same time next
Okay,
Monday?
that works for you.
Yeah, like 4 Eastern.
Yeah, yeah, 4 East. All right, cool. All right, I'll send you a calendar invite.
Love the close. All right, let's do it.
Sweet. All right, brother.
All right, man.
Have a good one.
Enjoy. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Cool, guys. Hopefully that was helpful. Reach out to me if you have any questions. If you found this to be helpful, reach out. Hopefully this is valuable. My intent is to provide more value because I've had a lot of value. Like my coaches helped me to get promoted from SDR to SMB AE to mid-market to enterprise to strat. So hopefully I can offer the same value to you guys. If there's anything in particular that you want to just post in the comments below or just send me a DM and we'll chat soon. Cheers.